From the end of chapter 11 and beginning of chapter 12, Jesus has been addressing the hypocrisy of Israel's spiritual leaders, the Pharisees, and likewise warning his own men, warning his disciples concerning hypocrisy, that putting on an act for people, and he's been warning them that putting on this act is dangerous. It's wrong and dangerous if we act spiritual and holy for people's approval instead of God's approval. He goes on also to add that it's also wrong for us to hide our faith. And when we hide our faith in Jesus and act like the world out of fear of man and what they may think. But instead, he says we should have a healthy, respecting fear for the Lord. After all, he's the one who brought us into this world. After all, he is the ultimate authority. He is the ultimate approval. And he's the one who will eventually justify us. But he's also the one we're told that justifies us today. He leads us. And if we trust in him, he says that he would give us his spirit that would give us the words to say when we need to. He would lead us by his spirit today. So he'll justify us later. He'll justify and lead us today as we move forth if we'll just trust in him. Profess him. Be a light for him. And what Jesus was contrasting in last week's text is also what we'll see him continuing to contrast in this week's passage. And in this week, we'll see that the temporal and the lack of perspective, the lack of concern and readiness for the eternity. That's what he's contrasting. You're worried about man who can hurt the body, worry about God who can hurt the soul, right? You put your trust in him. You don't trust man. You don't fear man. You fear God for the eternal. And so he continues this. And he adds to it readiness. Now, I've called this message, Don't Worry, Be Ready. All right? Here's a little song I wrote. You should sing it note for note. Don't worry, be ready, right? That's what it should be. Because if you don't worry and you're ready, man, you'll be happy. That's what Jesus says in here. He says you'll be blessed, you'll be happy. So in Luke chapter 12, verse 13, then one from the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. But he said to him, Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? And he said to them, Take heed and beware of the covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. Don't you just love Jesus' open forum teaching? I mean, I think about Jesus as he's teaching, how he's grabbing the every moment. It's like being a parent, right? Your kids are having these moments take place, and you seize those moments of opportunity to teach, to share with them life and eternity and God, and you speak into. Well, he's just waiting for every little opportunity, and he jumps on it, and he begins teaching. It's life teaching with these guys. So while he's warning concerning hypocrisy, he's teaching on bearing false witness of who these guys were to be, who we're really supposed to be outwardly as well as inwardly. While he's doing that, he takes the opportunity now to address covetousness, to address greed. Tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. So while Jesus is teaching, one of his hearers, someone from the crowd, they were having trouble with their brother concerning proper inheritance. I mean, that never happens, right? It's a nightmare, right? It never, but here it is. It is happening then, just like it happens today. Only the Jewish laws are pretty forthright, and they were pretty clear that the oldest son would receive a double portion of the inheritance. The law stipulated that. But for some reason, this guy thought that he was being cheated, that he was being undermined by his brother. His brother was clearly in possession of this inheritance, And he wanted Jesus to persuade his brother to reproportion the wealth. That's what he's getting to. It was common in those days for rabbis to be brought into the mix. Just like pastors get brought into it. It's weird, but it happens. But they would bring their issues to the rabbis, and the rabbis would mediate such matters. But most of the time, they would have both sides presented to them. Both sides would bring their case. This guy doesn't even ask Jesus to decide the merits of his brother's case, of his brother's side, his claims. He asked for a decision to be made in his own favor. Now, I'm not sure, but maybe this guy, he's moved by Jesus' teaching, maybe about stepping up for Jesus and not denying him, not hiding his faith. Maybe he's moved by that, but he's got this one dilemma, this one thing in his heart that's unchecked, and it's this deal with his brother. I mean, I'm just supposing maybe this is what's happening. That maybe this guy's responding to Jesus' exhortation and saying, "Okay, I'll stand for you, Jesus. But first, do this for me. My brother, he's ripping me off," right? And Jesus, he responds, "Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you?" It wasn't that Jesus is unconcerned about justice, but he was mostly concerned with this man's heart condition. Covetousness would do to him more harm than not having his share of the inheritance. Plus, God did not send the Son of God, Son of Man, into the world to judge the world. John 3 says that. But that the world might be saved through him. He's about eternal business here. When Jesus comes back, we're told in Matthew 25:31 that he will judge on these such matters. But at this point, Jesus is saying, "Hey, I'm not an arbitrator over you." And this guy may have thought that divulging this plight or making this request known with the crowd would have given him some sort of leverage, and that Jesus would have dealt with his brother. But instead, he and his case become this object lesson of discussion for Jesus and the whole crowd. And Jesus says, "Take heed and beware of covetousness." I could see the guy going, "Hey, wait a minute. That's not what's going on here," right? Take heed and beware of covetousness. We've been reading over and over and over again that Jesus perceived their thoughts. He knew their hearts. And he seemed to deal always with the heart issues. So I can't help but think that greed or injustice is what was going on here. And he wanted this man and all of those who were listening to beware of greed. To beware of greed and how it takes root in our hearts. And let me just say, it can creep in innocently as we may think, hey, this is a sense of my responsibility. I've got to do this. I've got to forsake that person and that and not care about anyone else but this. It's a sense of responsibility. It may creep in like that. It's a sense of responsibility. It's possibly wisdom. I'm just preparing for a rainy day. I'm hoarding and amassing, and I'm preparing for a rainy day, right? I mean, it sounds like wisdom. But you know, I'm trying to acquire and get so that then I can help others. I'm not helping anyone today, not helping anyone else, but I'm thinking about myself here. But eventually, when I get where I need to be, then I'll be able to help more proficiently and efficiently with others. I mean, that's how it creeps in. I'm only saying that because I've said it from experience, right? I've been there and I've said that before. And if we don't watch out, our life is wrapped around and made up of that principle and that endeavor, which by itself to prepare is not good, is not a bad thing, but it becomes something that consumes you, and you forsake everyone else in that process. But Jesus goes on to say, one's life does not consist in the abundance of things he possesses. I mean, this is the overall principle that Jesus will develop in the following teaching on material things. When we live with the attitude, that our life does consist in what we possess, kind of makes who we are, how we judge success, when we live with that attitude, we live in covetousness. And Colossians chapter 3, verse 5, Paul tells us that this is idolatry, that covetousness is idolatry. So then Jesus, he spoke a parable. Verse 16. The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, oh, okay, here's an idea. I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater. And there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for you for many years. Take your ease. Eat, drink, and be merry. Verse 20, but God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he, Jesus says, who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. This is a powerful passage. So Jesus paints the picture of a wealthy farmer with a fantastic harvest. His storage bins are full. He has nowhere to put his latest successful crop. And they didn't have storage units back then, right? Now they're everywhere, banks and storage units. And mattress places. That just added to my list. Wow, okay. He didn't have those things. What am I going to do with this successful harvest? What should I do? Let me draw your attention to this man's first problem. And Jesus couldn't emphasize it any greater. The word I. The word I, my, is central in this text. In 3 short verses, 17, 18, and 19, I and my are used 8 times. So, who was this man really concerned about? Himself. No one else, especially the Lord. I think it's in James 4. He says, we shouldn't say, let's go to this town and let's make this profit. But he says, hey, we should say, if the Lord wills. That the Lord should be brought into everything that we're our endeavors, right? He should be centralized. The first problem is ingrained selfishness. Jesus brings forth with this farmer. The second problem, what is this man's overarching goal? Verse 19, I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. What is his goal? He was seeking to fulfill ultimate satisfaction and rest. That in itself isn't bad, but where do you seek that? That's bad. And he's chasing after the elusiveness of self-satisfaction. And it really, well, it just doesn't exist. This man will never, ever find it. And he'll never really find ultimate satisfaction. When we seek after it in our own merit, with our own hands and endeavor, like this man. Because here's what will happen. One thing leads to the next. You'll see it, it's the crux of addiction in every form and fashion. Greed, covetousness, right? I've got to have this consume. I got to get a better buzz. I got to get a better wife. I got to get a better husband. I got to get a better job. I got to get a better whatever. You fill in the blank, and it's always there's no satisfaction no matter how many bank accounts you have, how much you have, what your 401k is doing. It doesn't matter. You'll never be satisfied when that is your focus, when that is your goal, is rest when you get to that place, because there's just the next place waiting for you. And here's what happens. But God now who's been not part of the equation is brought in. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. So in one night, all the man's accomplishments, all of his plans are ruined. The idea here is that he will give an account for his life. His soul will be required. Right? He will give an account for his life. To the unbeliever, it's going to be that great and terrible white throne judgment. Revelation 20. But to you and I, followers of Christ, it will be a different kind of judgment called the Bema Seat judgment. Paul speaks of it in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. He also speaks to it in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, where we'll give an account for our works, right? And to this man, Jesus says, well, he's a fool. No, he's a fool not because he's rich, but because he lived without any awareness, without any preparation for his eternity. And Jesus adds, so is everyone a fool if they put all of their attention in laying up treasures for themselves, and if they're not concerned or care about being rich towards God. Do you know that we have a 401k and a God account in heaven? We do. It's the craziest thing ever when you think about it, but we do. This 401k, this isn't part of our salvation, for we're saved by grace through faith in Jesus' finished work on the cross, that he died for our sins, and we have entered into God's favor because of that. This has nothing to do with our salvation. But Jesus teaches us that we do have a sort of account that we are either contributing to, and we'll see this, I'll greater develop this in the next teaching, in the next passage, as Jesus teaches. We're either contributing to this account or we're not, as in the case of this selfish farmer. But Jesus knows that covetousness sometimes starts innocently, out of concern, out of worry. After all, it's wise to plan. It's wise to prepare. The Proverbs tell us this, teach us this. Logic teaches us this. Nature teaches us this, right? It's a wise thing to do that. And so it's typically those kind of things the enemy creeps in and says, this isn't bad, right? But Jesus knows that covetousness sometimes, starts there, but then it grows. Starts becoming concern and worry. So Jesus goes on to address worry. In verse 22, he says, and he said to his disciples, therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you'll eat, nor about your body and what you'll put on. Life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap, which have neither storehouse nor barn, and God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by worrying, can add 1 cubit to his stature? It's my favorite verse. And if you then are not able to do the least, why are you anxious for the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. And yet I say to you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. And if God so clothes the grass, which today is in the field and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? So from the sins of greed and selfishness, Jesus turns to that of worry, which in a way is connected with the other two, because greed can neither get enough, and worry is afraid that it may not ever have enough. Wealth can represent a danger to those who do not have, as well as those who do. The struggle is on both sides of that camp. So if you think you're going to arrive when you get to the other side, you'll find yourself in the same predicament. Pastor Chuck Smith used to say, he has a principle within Calvary Chapels: what you strive to attain, you strive to maintain, right? Those who have are always trying to figure out how they can keep it and grow it, right? Problem is on the other side. Everyone looks at the people who have and says, man, if I could only just have what they have, and I'm going to try to get it, right? They're both struggle. It's covetousness, right? Jesus says, do not worry about life. And he goes on to define life as what we'll eat and what we'll put on. And he does that there because really it was a major concern in that day and age. And to what you wear and what you eat is probably a major concern in most of the world, other than where we live, right, in America. Most of the world, it's still that, right? Hey, don't worry about these things. But then he really makes it, and I love this, how he makes it extremely applicable for everyone, because he says, do not worry about life. Do not worry about life in general, speaking, who your mate, spouse will be, where you'll PCS or migrate, if your health will hold up for winter. Will I get that promotion or get accepted into that pack? And I purposely paralleled these questions to animals, because that's what Jesus does when he compares us to the birds here. When we're concerned with only the physical, temporal things. You see, but our life possesses so much more, because we are eternal beings. We serve an eternal God who cares for us, who values us. And he values us more than all the other creatures. And let me add, when Jesus says, do not worry, there's a difference between a godly sense of responsibility, concern. There's a difference between that and an ungodly, untrusting worry. I wrestle with this topic. I'm teaching on worry, and I'm worried that no one's going to show up for my other two services. I'm worried that I'm not going to stay in my time frame. And then God's like, you're teaching on worry. How are you worrying, Okay, God, I'm concerned about this. It's a healthy concern. Right? Call it whatever you want. God knows better. Trust me, I've struggled with this personally, though. Chasing after temporal things, thinking that I was being responsible. I was in an internship back in 95, and I left the ministry thinking I was pursuing something better, that I would be able to make money and then give back more to the God who changed my life radically. And so I left the ministry to do this, seeking after this. And it wasn't long that I was off course, making money, but off course. And I struggled. So I struggled with this. See, I was seeking after the temporal things. And then I came back on full-time ministry 15 years ago, then having children. Then I find myself worrying. How are we going to do this? And how are we going to do that? Man, I wish I could say I figured this out. I haven't. I'm still learning this. Those close to me know. I still have to deal with this and go, God, help me to trust you in this. He's such a beautiful God. And it's a lesson that I think we all have to learn over and over and over again, to trust the Lord and not to worry. If worrying could add a cubit to my statue, I'd be 7'8" right now. Look at me. Just look at me. I tell you what trusting in the Lord has done. It's add 2 cubits to my spiritual walk. It's add 2 cubits to my spiritual height when I trust in him. The Lord, help us to see how valued we are. That you love us so much. Help us not to be of little faith. That was his heart for his disciples. That's his heart for us. And Jesus goes on to emphasize our need to replace worry of the temporal things with the concern and the endeavor for the eternal things. Verse 29, and do not seek what you should eat or what you should drink, nor have an anxious mind. For all these things the nations of the world seek after, and your Father knows that you have need of these. But seek the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added to you. Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell what you have and give alms. Provide yourselves money bags which do not grow old, a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thieves approaches, nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, he says, there your heart will be. So Jesus says that the nations or the world seeks after just the temporary. But you and I, we should seek after And first, seek after God's kingdom. It's an order of things, a priority of things. This must be the rule of our life when setting in order our priorities. This should not be just another priority that we fit into the list of priorities in our life, but rather placed at the very top. But what about my real, legitimate problems, Pastor Randy? What about my real temporal needs that I have? Do they just disappear when I seek first the kingdom? Do they just go away if I ignore them, if I don't deal with them? They're just taken care of? Not at all. But I can tell you this, out of experience and witnessing it personally too from others, something absolutely miraculous happens. Something miraculous happens when we seek first the kingdom of God, when we put him on the top of our priority list. Place his concerns first. The Lord will either meet us with those needs, working supernaturally through the natural, right? Giving us rational collective wisdom, giving us patience, direction, supernaturally working through the natural. He'll either do that or he removes the problem by doing something supernatural. I've seen both happen, and it's amazing, but always to his glory, right? When we seek first his kingdom, put him in the priority list at the very top. And why would the God of the universe be moved to take my cares, to take my concerns on, and meet me with his provisions? Why would he do that? You know why? Because we are his little flock. Isn't that beautiful? We are his little flock. He says, I do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So not only is he encouraging the disciples that were about to face some pretty intense things come the crucifixion and onward, but he's speaking to us. Hey, he comes to us, he says, hey, I don't worry about these things. You put me first. Trust me, I'll help you work out the details. He meets our needs, and in return, we receive something that is far more valuable than anything in this world. It can't be priced, his kingdom. We have this 401k plan, treasure in heaven, that will not suffer diminishing return, will not be taxed or stolen. And when we're mindful of it constantly, investing in it daily, when we do this, it doesn't just benefit us later, but it will help us today to confront covetousness. It helps us, it guards us, it tethers us, keeps us from being greedy when we know that, hey, I've got to be invested in something beyond just this temporal pleasure and need here, but something far beyond. It guards me against covetousness so it doesn't dominate my heart. And as you and I place others first with our time, talents, and treasures, we'll be invested in that heavenly account. I have a feeling we'll have a lot of entries that we won't recognize. I don't remember that. But you were trusting me. Wouldn't you love those? Those Monopoly cards that say, hey, bank errors in your favor, $50. It's never happened, ever. Only Monopoly. But we'll see those. We'll go, wow, that's amazing. God, where did that come from? You were trusting me. That's where that came from. And it's such a beautiful benefit and reality that we have as we place him first. And I know I've said this before, but it bears repeating. Having things and making money is not bad. But when making money and having things is your treasure and it has you, that's a problem, because that's where your heart is. But there is something to be said about planning. There's something to be said about preparing. We do it for college. We do it for careers. We do it for hurricanes. We do it for retirement. But are we truly preparing for our eternity? And are we truly preparing for our Lord's return? That's what Jesus says in verse 35. He says, let your waist be girded and your lamps burning, and you yourselves be like men who wait for their masters when he will return from the wedding, that when he comes and the flocks, they may open to him immediately. Blessed are those servants from the master when he comes, he'll find watching. Surely I say to you that he will gird himself and have them sit down to eat, and will come and he'll serve them. And if he should come in the second watch, that's 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, or if he should come the third watch from 12 to 3 o'clock in the morning and find them, so blessed are those servants. But know this, that if the master of the house had known the hour a thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed this house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready. Be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So here, Jesus reinforces his teaching on the right use of wealth with a reminder that earthly things are temporary, but the coming of the Son of Man is sure. Let your waist be girded. Let your lamps be burning. So the idea that Jesus is conveying is that we should be able to and should be displaying active work, hands always on the plow that the Lord has given us. Each of us have our own plow that he's given us. And we should have it on day and night, serving in our homes and our communities, at our offices, in our classrooms, at our churches, never taking time off from serving him, never taking a vacation from his service, but always watching, waiting, and ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that we do not expect. He says, if you knew someone was going to come and break in the middle of the night at a certain time, hey, at 5 o'clock, someone's going to come and break in. Are you going to be ready with a 12 gauge? You know it, right? He's saying that's the logic behind that. So if you don't know, but you know someone's coming, are you ready all the time? Absolutely. Does it get tiring? Sure. But we don't go weary in doing good and waiting and watching and serving, being ready, all right? We naturally interpret this as Jesus' second coming. But I think it could be safe to say, to include for practical and contextual sake, when that time comes and our souls are required of us, right? Just like the former. So what does it look like to be ready? Stand with me.